Welcome to another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, Guy Live B2B Jam Session, your favorite jam session. Today, I'm actually not in Oakland, California. Today, I am in Culver City, California. Have been hanging out for the weekend and week with a few friends out here. But nevertheless, I still have an amazing guest for today's live jam session. And you are probably dying to know who it is. But before I get into who it is, I want to show you some love wherever you're tuning in from. If you're tuning in from the Bay Area, our lovely guest today is actually from the Bay Area. If you're tuning in from Oakland, much love to you. Hopefully, you've gotten your breakfast, you've gotten your lunch, and you're about to get your dinner pretty soon. With that said, if you're tuning in from international waters, because we always have a lot of international listeners, hope you're handling and taking care of yourself. Happy Thursday or Friday, wherever you're tuning in from, whether it be the UK, Nigeria. Please, let's end SARS and let's end police brutality. Make sure you all are safe there. And fundamentally, if you're tuning in from the UK, because we always have a lot of UK audience members as well, much love to you, and hopefully you're having a great day so far. With that said, I don't know if some of you have heard of Craft Ventures, but Craft Ventures is an early stage VC fund dedicated to the craft of building great companies. And I'm excited to dive deep on today's episode with David Sachs, who is the co-founder and general partner of Craft. He has been a successful tech entrepreneur and investor for 2 decades, building and investing in some of the most iconic companies of the last 20 years. He's invested in over 20 unicorns, from the firms to the Airbnbs, to the Birds, to the Eventbrite, to the Facebook house, you name it. And today I'm going to dive deep with him on movement marketing, which is like my favorite word right now, movement marketing. Definitely because I believe in this idea of leading your startup and building your company as a movement. And literally, Davis literally wrote a great blog around it, which was really interesting to me. So I wanted him to come in and let's dissect it and really talk about how do we define movement marketing in this era of new platform companies that are coming up. And I'm also going to ask him a few questions on what are some of the trends that he's seeing in the SaaS marketplace and some of the best movement marketers that he's seeing rise out of this time. With that said, let's show us some love to David. And if you are tuning in, you have questions, you already know I got you. I'm going to be dishing out the questions to David, and I think we're going to be excited to answer them. With that said, David, how's it going, man?
Hey, Tim, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for making time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Yeah. With that said, have you had your breakfast? Have you had lunch? What'd you eat for today, man?
What did I eat? I had breakfast, and that's basically it. I kind of do a single meal for breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, no. I'm very that way.
Yeah, most of my day is just doing Zooms, so I'm just Zooming all day.
No, and I'm sure Zoom fatigue is a real thing for you by now, right?
It is, yeah. No, it's I get up in the morning and I walk over to my office, and then I'm on Zoom the whole day, and then I walk back to the house, and that's it. So yeah.
Let me ask you, Dave. You wrote a really great blog post recently around movement marketing. Would love for you to share a little bit more about movement marketing. How do you define it?
Yeah. So the piece, the article I wrote, really encourages founders to think of themselves as not just building a product or even a company, but rather a movement. If you look at the companies that seem to have the greatest change in the world, and you look at what their founders are trying to do, they don't just talk about, their product features. They don't just talk about dollars and cents and quarterly earnings and revenue. They articulate a vision of the future that attracts followers, that attracts adherents. And they talk about a larger mission and change they want to make in the world. In other words, they create a movement. And so I started, analyzing the techniques that the most successful founders use to do this. And that collection of techniques is what I call movement marketing.
And I think it's such a powerful concept because it's so relevant to, I think, some of the greatest companies who have scaled that you've invested in, such as an Airbnb, who really led their own movements by building amazing brands. For you, how do you think startup founders can approach being at the forefront of their movements?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that the starting point is if you're a founder, you need to think about what's the larger cause that your startup stands for. And you need to define what that cause is. What is the change that you want to make in the world? Peter Thiel, who I worked with at PayPal, said that the best startups are like a cult that believes in something true. And there's like a fanaticism. But unlike most cults which believe in something just totally false or preposterous, the best startups are like a cult that believes in something true. And so the thing to think about is, well, what is that mission that your startup stands for? Because you need to be able to describe the change you're seeking to bring about, why it's important, why people will benefit from it. Because what you're really trying to do with movement marketing is get people to give you their attention for free, right? This is not paid marketing. With paid marketing, you're buying people's attention. With movement marketing, you're asking people to give you some of their attention for free. And no one's going to give you their attention just if you only stand for yourself. You have to stand for a cause larger than yourself. So I always think it starts with defining that larger cause.
It's so powerful because with Airbnb and a few of the companies who have really led movements with their platforms, maybe even the Facebooks of the world, there was a singular mission that everyone abided by and allowed them to really scale to where they're at now. For you, as someone that's an investor in a variety of different companies, and you're seeing all of the startups that are popping up around COVID-19 or even pre-COVID-19, how do you kind of encourage founders to think about building for a movement, right? Because I think anyone can build a startup nowadays, but it's harder to build a movement around that or that product or idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the thing you have to do, I guess, in thinking about this type of marketing is you've got to up level. Too many founders are sort of in the weeds of their product features, the product that they're building. That's natural because I think most founders start with a very specific product vision. They know what it is that they're building. But in order to do this kind of movement marketing, you have to up level the message and explain to people why it matters. So for example, I mean, the two examples I give in the article, the two companies I think do this extremely well are Tesla and Salesforce. So when Elon, talks about Tesla's mission, he talks about moving the world to sustainable energy. They're not making cars over there, and they're not even just making electric cars or even the best electric car or the best car, period. He's doing all those things, but what he talks about first is moving the world to sustainable energy. That is the overall mission and change they're trying to bring about in the world. And if you go to like any Tesla product event, any Tesla launch event where they unveil a new car, Elon will always begin by talking about the need to move the world to sustainable energy. Now, after that, he will bring the conversation down to earth by showing the latest product, the new car, the new features of that car, why it's so awesome, why it goes 0 to 60 faster than the alternatives, and so on. So, he will get to the product. This is not you can't ignore the product. The product is the heart of what you're selling, but he manages to up-level the message into this larger this larger cause, and it's that cause that really attracts this passionate community around Tesla. It's the combination of that cause and having a great product. And so founders frequently they only have one piece of it. They may have a product, but they haven't really thought about how to up-level the message. Or maybe they've got like a great message, but they haven't really figured out how to nail the product. And what you really want to do is combine those two things.
No, I love this point of really up-leveling the messaging and focusing on the core narrative at a high level, which is driving sustainable change in the case of Elon. But for whatever your product is what is that, in product they often say is, what is the as-is state and then what is the to-be state, and really staying at that layer of the narrative versus really just going at it and getting into the weeds first with the product, because the product in itself. If it's a good product, it'll sell itself. And, I really find this powerful. David, I want to kind of get your thoughts on, because you're pretty active on social media, and a lot of investors use social media to find great talent or even the next big startups. How important is social media for founders who want to get the word out on their movement? I recently actually read a study literally on Twitter today that said that a lot of founders who actually are social first and they're building in public, they actually see a lot more investment interest, and they are maybe more likely to do well. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, when I was a founder and running my company Yammer, I would take to social media, mostly Twitter, but there are others, Facebook, and there are other platforms as well, to promote what I was doing. And sometimes you're promoting a product, a new release, but it could also be a milestone, some new funding, or customer announcements, or just a point of view that you have. And I think it's really important to be on these platforms evangelizing for your message, because otherwise, if you're not doing it yourself, you're having to work through somebody else's channel, and your message gets heavily filtered. You can't just depend on other people to tell the story for you. One mistake that I think founders make is that they rely on, say, the press or media to tell their story for them. And I think it makes sense to work with press or influencers, but you need to tell the story directly yourself, because nobody else can tell the story as well as you can.
Oh yeah, and it's one of my good friends once told me you have to always control the narrative.
Yep. Yeah, because I think especially when it comes to technology and Silicon Valley and tech startups, the things that the tech reporters want to talk about are not necessarily what you want to talk about. So, for example, most of the tech reporters, they want to know about what's your valuation and how much money did you raise and when are you going to IPO. And frankly, those are questions that aren't really that interesting to your movement. Frankly, they're inside baseball. They're the kinds of things that Silicon Valley insiders care about. And it's not really helpful to your movement to be talking about that kind of inside baseball. So you want to make sure that you're always serving your movement, not the insider's game. And the best way to do that is to tell the story yourself.
Yeah, and so, that's powerful. So if you're listening to your
and you look at Elon, right? I mean, he's got this massive channel. In fact, it's pretty amazing that I just read somewhere that Tesla abolished its PR department. I mean, that's like an extreme version.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of like, look, Elon's saying, I'm going to tell the story myself. I've got a gigantic following on Twitter. What's he up to? Like millions of followers.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't need, I don't need to tell Tesla's story through other people's publications. I have my own publication, my own platform, and we're going to tell the story that way. And so, yeah, you want to start as a founder, you want to start building your own platform. I mean, I've started doing this myself too, where I've got my Twitter account. I've also started doing a podcast with some friends. We call it the All In Podcast. I'm doing it with Jason Kalkanis and Chamath Palihapitiya and David Freeberg. And so we, every couple of weeks we do a podcast. So, I think everybody now is realizing that they have to build their own communication platform if they want to get their message out.
Yeah, no, it's such a powerful point of view too, because it goes back to controlling the narrative, but also the fact that, one of the things that I study is the creator economy. Elon is for sure one of like the world's leading innovators. And the thing is, he has the platform. So if you have the platform, then you have an amazing technology platform of a company. Is that why would you have someone else, whether it be publications, online media firms that often sometimes kind of skew the narrative? Why would you have them tell the story that you can tell best and you can control the narrative? And I love this modern day example, because I think a lot of founders often, when they first start building companies, they think that the best place to kind of get the message out is to go to a PR firm or to go to online media channels. But what you're kind of movement marketing is that no, it's like just keep telling the story, and finding your believers.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I mean, the first thing you have to have is a point of view, right? You've got to have something, have a narrative worth telling. And I think it's fine to talk to reporters in the early days, but the most important thing is to build your own platform with your own point of view, and that starts, I guess, with having a Twitter account. But you have to have something that's, you know, you have to have something to say. You know, you have to have an interesting perspective. I'll give you another example. You know, who I think has done this amazingly well is Mark Benioff at Salesforce. He is,
Absolutely.
yeah, he's absolutely one of the best marketing CEOs in Silicon Valley. And I think what's interesting about the Salesforce example is that what Salesforce is doing isn't necessarily inherently the most interesting subject matter, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's CRM. What Elon is doing with those, yeah, I mean, with those like electric cars, that's cool. I mean, those are like the fastest cars on the planet. They're really cool, sexy products. But what Benioff is marketing at Salesforce is CRM. And so
Yeah.
what Benioff shows is that even if your product is, you know, it's a business product, it's not something that is inherently going to be of interest to the average consumer, it's still possible to
Mm.
create a point of view and a narrative that really uplevels the conversation and gets people's attention. And the thing that Benioff did is that right at the beginning, he realized that it was all about the cloud. You know, it wasn't
Mm.
about CRM, it wasn't about sales software, even though that was technically his product. It was all about the cloud. And
Mm.
so he adopted this narrative from the very, very beginning of Salesforce that Salesforce was going to represent this transition of business to the cloud. And so he then created this no software mantra with a 1-800 no software phone number and this no software logo with the word software crossed out. And so he kind of made software his enemy, and made cloud the sort of the antithesis of software, was the thing that he was going to promote over software. And that was like a much larger framing of what he was trying to do than just promoting CRM. And
Mm.
so by up leveling the message and the framing of what he was trying to do, it made Salesforce punch way above its weight class. It made them way more interesting to a much larger number of people. And the proof of that sort of today is that Dreamforce is now the largest tech conference. Over 70,000 people pilgrimage to Dreamforce every year, at least in the
Wow.
year we don't have, you know, before COVID. And so he was able to up level the message in a way that made Salesforce into the largest tech conference, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you know, Salesforce has built a huge, huge community that they've been nurturing for upwards to 20 years now, almost, I believe, and it continues to grow. You know, and I think that brings me to my next question for you, Mr. Sachs, is, you know, why do you believe nurturing a strong community is so important to movement marketing? And you know, you've had a familiar experience in this space with some of the past companies that you built. So, you know, how do founders approach that? Because there are founders who are great technologists, there are founders who are great product people, but it's very few founders who are evangelists and community empowerers, right? So, what would you be your framework for how founders should think about nurturing a strong community to lead their movement?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think we should define exactly what the word community means, because I think different people have different perspectives on that. And I define a community in a very specific way, which is a community is a place for your customers to learn from each other, your
Mm.
customers and supporters to learn from each other. Now, when you're on social media, that's a different kind of community, I guess you could say, but that's you broadcasting to as many people as you can reach, and that's
Yeah.
important. But that's different than your customers learning from each other. And there's something very, very powerful about creating a forum. And it could be Facebook, it could be LinkedIn, it could be Instagram. I mean, it could be a dedicated network that you buy from a software vendor. It could be your own product. One of the superpowers at Yammer was that we created a dedicated Yammer network for all of our customer admins, and that was the Yammer customer network, Yammer customer community. And so it's always a beautiful thing when you can be dog fooding your own product that way and use it to nurture your own community. But however you do it, there's many ways to do it. You really want to create that space, that place for your customers to talk to each other, because it galvanizes this movement that you have, right? It brings out the energy of your supporters, your customer base. It encourages people to share their enthusiasm, their wins, their successes with your product. And it's
Mm.
also a place for them to seek help or advice. Now, the thing that the objection that I hear the most from founders, that sometimes they say, well, I don't necessarily want to put all my customers in touch with each other. What if they start venting? Like we have customers who are upset about something or other. Maybe the product didn't work for them, or there was a bug or it broke or whatever. And founders can be, I think, nervous about that. And I guess what I would just tell you is that the benefits outweigh the risks, because I think you'll find that the customers will help each other. And the next time that somebody has a problem, it's really cool to see one customer jump in and help another customer, so that you don't even have to do it. And it really creates this sense of a larger movement, which is why it's one of the tactics that I describe in the article.
Yeah, in your days, leading and building Yammer, for you, was it always a magical moment when you saw customers start interacting with each other and probably even sharing tips with each other on how to effectively use the product?
Absolutely. It's totally magical. And, and sometimes, I think one of the coolest things is when customers start describing to each other their use cases and how they're realizing value from the product, and new ways to use the product that you didn't even think of. That's really neat.
Wow. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I think it's every founder's dream to have their customers start actually be intertwined with each other and engaging with each other to better the product and better the brand too at the end of the day.
Yeah, just create a place for them to go. So we have an amazing portfolio company called Trusted, which is a marketplace for hospitals to hire nurses. And they have their main community is a group on Facebook. And it's a Facebook group where basically all the nurses and prospective nurses, they may not be on Trusted yet, but they're looking to learn more. And so they go on this Facebook group and start asking each other questions. And nurses who've used Trusted start describing the product to nurses who are interested, basically prospects. And there's just no more credible source of information than your own happy customers. Because whenever you're trying to sell a new prospect, they're always going to be a little bit skeptical of the claims that you make. After all, you're trying to sell them, and it's human nature to kind of resist being sold. And so they're always going to be a little bit skeptical. But when one of your happy customers acts as a reference and provides testimony that the product has worked great for them, that's very, very credible. And so that's the kind of thing that's another thing that a community will bring out for you, is that if you let happy customers start mixing with prospects, they'll start doing the sales for you.
Man, and it's a magical moment. I think that's what every founder literally is going for. And in this day, I think what I love about how you think about movement marketing is that movement marketing almost kind of creates a new reality for your customers to live in. But you need founders who aren't afraid to be thought leaders at the helm to kind of visualize and say, hey, this is what this new reality looks like, and this is why you should join us, versus us selling you. We're not going to sell it to you. You're going to join us in creating the movement, and we can co-create it together.
Right. Yeah, you've got to be willing as a founder to evangelize for the movement. You've got to evangelize for your product and for why it needs to exist in the world, why doing things a different way that your product enables is that you're trying to move the world to a new way of doing things. Typically, if you're a founder of a startup, because startups have to do new things, right? Big established companies already own the existing ways of doing things. And so you've really got to evangelize for a new way of doing things, and you've got to figure out how to describe it in that way. So one of the things that I really encourage is for founders to essentially attack the status quo, right? Every startup has an opponent, but don't think of your opponent as being your competitors. Your opponent is always some version of the status quo, right? There's always, because if the status quo were perfect, there'd be no need for the startup to exist, right? There's obviously something broken about the status quo, which is why you felt the need to create a new company. And you've got to kind of name what that enemy is. And so the example I gave before with Mark Benioff is he named software as the enemy.
Wow.
Which was very counterintuitive, right? Because was Benioff talking about all software,
Yeah.
or just the kind that has to be installed on servers. And, because obviously Salesforce is a kind of software, but that to me is the kind of secondary detail that can be explained later once you have someone's attention. What Benioff was trying to say is that software is the enemy because you got to install it and then you got to bring IT in. And he was talking about the old way, the pre-internet, pre-cloud way of doing software. And, he made that the enemy so that then when the cloud came along, he could describe moving to the cloud as this, huge win for business. And so you've kind of got to figure out what is it about the status quo is always going to be your enemy. The question is, what is it about the status quo that's broken? Let's put a name on that. And then you go out and you start attacking that status quo. Now, I think as a startup, you're never attacking, this is not politics. We're not mudslinging. We're not attacking people. We're trying to figure out some way of describing the status quo to indicate how painful and broken it is. So for example, at Yammer, the framing we came up with is that our enemy is the org chart, right? We're not saying you shouldn't have an org chart, but the org chart is too rigid to be the way that information flows in a company, right? Because if information only flows through the org chart, you're going to trap it. You're going to trap the information. It doesn't go where it needs to go. You're going to stifle dissent. You're going to create bureaucracy. And so Yammer was this idea that we could let anybody in the company talk to anybody else, like a social network, to share the information they need to get their jobs done. And so, that was one framing that we came up with. That our description kept evolving. We always were seeking a better way of describing the problem. And the more vivid we can make the description, the more intuitive our solution became, right? If you can get people to buy into the problem, they will just assume that you have the solution.
That's powerful, man. That's so powerful, David. And for me, as we're building our company Guide, we realize that the enemy isn't that there's not other software companies that build education tech products. It's really the fact that the status quo of traditional, very default education standards that really don't optimize around quality, that's the actual enemy. And you kind of have to, even when you're pitching, and also when you're kind of evangelizing the products, like you have to tell everyone, like, hey, like, we love that L&D products exist. That's cool and all, but we believe that traditional education, the fact that we still require people to go into schools to learn from experts and things like that, that's the fundamental enemy. So that's actually really powerful you say that, because I think that can also, I think in Mark Benioff's case, it applies to Salesforce and software as a service, but it can also apply to any other industry. And a lot of founders should be able to see, okay, in your industry, what are the parallel enemies that aren't necessarily your competitors, but are the status quo?
Right, exactly. You should treat your competitors as validation that the world is coming over to your point of view, because the enemy is some version of the status quo. It's it's the way that traditional education works. And the fact that there's these other companies who may be your competitors is validation that the world is starting to see the problem the way that you do. And so if you're able to articulate why the status quo is broken, if you're able to describe the pain that users are feeling with the existing solutions, with the existing world, people, and you can describe that so articulately that people say, wow, yeah, they really understand what I'm going through, they really understand my problem. Again, this is a point that Christopher Lockhead, a marketing guru, has pointed out, is if they think that you've just nailed exactly the problem that they're experiencing, you must know the solution. They'll give you credit for having the solution before you've even gotten to it. And then of course you can start to describe how your product works. But the mistake that I think a lot of founders make is they just want to jump into what their features are. And the average prospect or customer, there is a time to discuss features, but it's only after they believe that you understand their problem, and then you can start to present the solution.
Amazing. Hey, founders, if you're listening and tuning in right now, please take notes, and more importantly, follow Mr. David Sachs, and the movement that he's leading, our Craft Ventures. David, where can people continue to follow you? We know you're pretty active on Twitter, but where else can people kind of reach out to you to learn more about movement marketing?
Yeah, so I've been blogging on Substack. So you can go to sachs.substack.com and see my newsletters. It's free, But so I've been writing blogs, and then you can join my mail list and you'll get emailed the blogs, or you can follow me on Twitter and I'll post things there. So yeah.
And is there a hopeful book coming out around movement marketing, man? Because it seems like you're really passionate about it, man.
Well, I'm honestly thinking about a book on bottom up SaaS, of which movement marketing would be one piece of it. So my blog on Substack is called Bottom Up, and there's a reason for that, which I can go into if you want. Which is, historically, business software has been sold top down. The company creates its software, and then it tries to figure out who its buyer is, and they create lists of prospective buyers, and they call on those buyers, and it's a very top-down sales process. And starting with Yammer, and then also I'd say Box was another company that did this. We started going bottom up into the enterprise starting at around 2008. And the way Yammer worked is that we didn't go talk to the CIO. We just put the product out there and let any employee in the company sign up and start spreading it inside their company. And then once that we had hundreds or even thousands of users at that company, then we went to the CIO and asked for a sale. And so it was a more bottom up way of creating a sale. And now that technique that Yammer and Box pioneered a dozen years ago is being used by dozens or even hundreds of software companies, where you use the average employee in the company as an entry point to get into the company. And then, once you start spreading, then you make the sale. So I call that bottom up SaaS. Some other people have called it product led growth. I think they're both, useful ways of describing this. And so what I've tried to do in my blog is kind of go through, all the techniques of bottom up SaaS, and movement marketing is definitely one of the big ones. And so, if I do get around to publishing the book, movement marketing will definitely be a chapter.
It has to be. And we look forward to having you back on and sharing more about it with us, man.
For sure. Absolutely.
For sure. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. And, we really, really appreciate you. And, keep on leading your movement with Craft Ventures, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Tim, great to be with you.
All right. Awesome. Talk soon, David. Have a good one.
Okay. Thank you.
And that was the amazing David Sachs. Oh my goodness, I can't speak today, y'all, because I'm currently in Culver City for some reason, right? With that said, thank y'all so much for joining us. If you have any questions on movement marketing, David is definitely the guy to engage with on Twitter or even through LinkedIn. Make sure you check out what Craft Ventures is doing. If you are interested in leading your own movement and you fit their thesis, check it out at Craft Ventures. And more importantly, think about, what are you building right now that's challenging the status quo versus settling for the status quo? And how can you lead your movement by being vocal about it, and more fundamentally, being at the helm of your movement? And more importantly, using social media to get the word out. I love Twitter, I love LinkedIn, I love other channels, but you are at the helm of your movement and you need to lead it and realize, hey, the world is waiting on you if you're building something cool. All right, y'all. With that said, thanks so much for joining us. If you've gotten your big black tee, show us some love. Send me a picture, a confirmation image or something on LinkedIn. Tag me on Twitter, tag me on Instagram, or even just send me a message in my DMs. I'm going to show you some love and highlight you for supporting us, and more importantly, being a part of our movement with Guide. All right, y'all. Talk soon. As always, peace, love, and abundance.